Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this rather dreary day. I'm Sarah Piccini. I'm the Assistant Director of the Lackawanna Historical Society. For the month of April, our Lackawanna Pastimes features will be focusing on histories of municipalities in Lackawanna County. We'll be looking at 2 different towns and talking a little bit about their early days and their origin stories. Today we'll be joined by Bruce Smallacombe, the former mayor of Jermyn. He'll be talking about the early days of Jermyn. And I hope he mentions my favorite fact, that Jermyn used to be known as Baconville. Bruce served as the mayor of Jermyn for 12 years and is a member of the St. David's Society and the Jermyn Historical Society. Bruce collects antiques and sports memorabilia, coached youth sports, plays softball and bowls. He's even a member of the Northeast Bowling Hall of Fame. Bruce received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Borough and the Borough of Jermyn and the Community Service Award from the Carbondale Chamber of Commerce. Bruce, I'll turn the program over to you now for an account of the early days of Jermyn.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to speak on the early history of Jermyn. I'm going to speak on the early history of 4 Mile Point. I'm going to speak on the early history of Baconville.
Yes.
And Rushdale.
Okay.
Gibsonburg, and then Jermyn. So we're going to start with the early part of Jermyn, which was part of Northumberland County years and years ago, and then became part of Luzerne County, and then is now part of Lackawanna County. We were part of Blakely Township, and when they became a township in 1818, and we were also part of Carbondale Township, which I didn't know because only a little piece of it is part of Carbondale Township. But in the early days, that's the way it was split up, and Jermyn actually resided the uppermost part of it in Carbondale Township. I have a little map, which you probably won't be able to see, but this map is a map that I found in the Library of Congress, dated 1864, and it's a map of Luzerne County. And through that map, I was able to locate some things in Jermyn that I didn't know about. And I'm amazed at some of the things that are in our centennial book that are wrong because people didn't have the access to the internet that we have now, and newspapers.com and all the genealogical stuff that we have now. So it's we're correcting a lot of this and we're rewriting history. The reason it's got its name 4 Mile Point is because it was 4 miles from Carbondale and 4 miles from Blakely. Blakely was the first real little town in the township, and Carbondale was the first city outside of Scranton, and the oldest, one of the 4th oldest city in the state, I believe. But because of the iron ore that they found in Scranton, the iron furnaces, they started to populate the valley, upper valley, a little bit more. And the Wirtz brothers were looking for coal, and they came up through the valley, and they found coal up in just south, actually in Carbondale Township. The Indians were here long before that, and evidence of that are found in things like this, which is an Indian bowl, which I found in a little stream just to the east of Jermyn. And it's a carved out bowl. I want to get it carbon dated. And when they were digging in certain parts of town, they found some spear points and different Indian arrowheads and small points. So I bring a few little things like that just to let people know that there were Indians actually here. We know they were, but now we found that they were here. I would have worn an Indian headdress, but I couldn't find one. But the people that were around had coonskin caps like this. So I wear the little coonskin cap so you'll know that there were fur trappers that were trading with the Indians. And that's enough of that nonsense. But 4 Mile Point was on the map. And in that little map, it dates a little tiny little dot called a tavern. And that was the 4 Mile Tavern that I've been searching and searching for so long while I was looking for history and couldn't find where it was. And we found out that it's right next to the confluence of the Rushbrook Creek into the Lackawanna River, right on the bottom of it. And the reason I found that is because it's dated right here on this map, and the old trail, which I found a piece of the old trail that went from Scranton, Blakely to Carbondale up in the Mayfield section, which is the next town north of Jermyn. And the cobblestones are still there, and they still outline the trail, the old wagon trail going towards Carbondale. And that trail ran along the river, which is where that tavern would be. And the guy that owned that tavern was Christopher Wilbur. Christopher Wilbur also is noted in a couple of Carbondale newspaper clippings as being friendly with the Wirtz brothers who found the coal in Carbondale. And his first house, I guess, was used as a schoolhouse, meeting house, church, bar, tavern, hotel, whatever it needed to be, because it was the only building between Blakely and Carbondale. We have an article that we got from a family, the Durst family in Jermyn, and one of their relatives was Isaac Carey. Isaac Carey, he built a house up in Scott Township, and he was about I guess 20 years old, somewhere around there, in 1828, and he stated that the only building between Blakely and Carbondale was the tavern on the west side of the main street in Jermyn, which there was none at that time, which was the old trail coming up through the valley. Some of the first buildings in Jermyn were owned, one was owned by Nathaniel Depew. His name is very familiar with people in Mayfield because his family later moved to Mayfield, and Depew Avenue in Mayfield is named after him. There was a Horner's store, which was on the map, which would have been there in the 1850s, somewhere around there. But the Wilbur, what it states in several articles is that there was a barn, a shed, a house, a tavern, and he owned roughly 300 and some acres of land in the 4 Mile area. The next person to come to Jermyn was Captain Daniel Bacon, who also owned about 300 acres bordering on Wilbur's farm. So Jermyn consisted of 2 farms, Wilbur's farm and Captain Daniel Bacon's farm. Captain Daniel Bacon, when he came there, he built a sawmill and then built another sawmill. And it's said that the tree stumps are too numerous to count. That's how many trees he cut down. He found nothing but laurels and pine trees when he came there. So they said that at one point there was as many as 30,000 board feet of lumber traveling up and down the Jermyn, road to Blakely and Carbondale at one time. He had 20 mule teams working for him, and he had numerous amount of people working for him. And on this map, it shows Mrs. Bacon's house. But he built 2 sawmills. One was the Great Western and one was the Keystone. One is where the St. James Episcopal Church is down by the Lackawanna River, and the other one was down towards the powder mills. That was the early part. That would take us through the 1820s and 1830s. 1826 to 28, they built the Gravity Railroad, started working on it, and they built it down to Archibald. By 1847, it traversed all the way down to Archibald. There was still no mining going on in Jermyn. Jermyn still didn't have any other name other than what it was at 4 Mile when they first started it. When Captain Daniel Bacon started to have people living there and people working for him, coming in and out, he couldn't decide whether he wanted the name to be Baconville or Hamburg, because he was particularly fond of Hamburg, I guess, but they named it Baconville. So I'm good with either one, it doesn't matter. So that's how Baconville got its name. It was named after him. And then when he died or his family moved away, they left Jermyn, and they renamed the town Rushdale. So all through the 1840s, Jermyn was called Rushdale because when they first seen the stream that ran down through there, they said it was a nice rushing brook with beautiful trout and colorful fish, and it was very plentiful. It's loaded with fish, so they called it the Rushing Brook. So then it eventually got the name Rushdale. I guess the first reason that we Jermyn became history was because of the coal, just like mostly all the rest of the towns in the valley. And the first mine shaft was sunk in Jermyn in 1857, and that was by a J.P. Offerman. And his house is also on the main street back in that map, that's the early map with only about 8 buildings on it. That was what was there in about 1857, 58. That map was started to be laid out in about 1858 because it shows the shaft on there, which was sunk in 1857. It's dated 1864, but that's when it was compiled and entered into the Library of Congress. So the map actually was probably mapped out in the upper part of the county where Jermyn sits back in 1858 or 1859. First colliery was built in 1860. That was the Jermyn colliery, and I think we have a picture of that somewhere in here. So this is all happening before the Civil War, of course. And this is the picture of one of the collieries that's there. I believe this is the second colliery, which was built in 1862. You see a little bit of glare on there, but that's the second colliery. We have pictures of both of them. They're both called the Gibsonburg collieries because it was Gibsonburg later on when these mines were being occupied quite a bit. I don't want to miss anything, so I have to put my glasses on. I'm sorry. I hate to do this. Let's see. Past the Wilbur Farm, we're past the Captain Daniel Bacon. The powder mills. The powder mills was built in 1864. And it was the Music powder mills, the DuPont powder mills. It's in the southern part of Jermyn, right on the border of Archibald, right along by the river. And there was numerous explosions there. And that is one of the reasons why they moved out of there, I guess, after the mines subsided. But let me see if I can pull up real quick some of the powder mill stuff. Powder mills exploded. The drying house exploded in 1867. And another building exploded twice in 1870. One man was killed there. 1872, May 13th, an explosion totally destroyed the powder mill. 3 lives were lost in that explosion. In 1873, the press house exploded. In 1879, the glazing mill exploded. Watchman survived when a section of the boiler fell against him and it shielded him from the rest of the explosion. He was the only one to survive. So that's the history of all of the explosions of the Music, DuPont, Rushdale powder mills, which was formed in 1864. 1862, the Methodist Episcopal Society was formed. That was the first religious society formed in Jermyn. They built their church they purchased their land in 1870, built their church in 1872. That was the first church building built in Jermyn. Prior to that, everybody met in a house on Main Street. It's a white house. It's still there in the 300 block of Main Street called Dose Domen, which means happy house. And it still sits there with the name still on the front of the house. And that's where they had the churches. They had schools there, and they held the first election there in 1870 as well. 1865, the Welsh Congregational Society was formed. They did not have a church building, and there was a couple articles that said they never built a building, and that is false. They did build a building later on after the articles were written. They didn't build a building up until the point of the article was written that's in the newspaper. And a lot of people come to me and say, oh, there was never a Welsh building. It says so in the paper. Well, there never was before that paper article was printed. The building was built in 1884. It was built on Madison Avenue in Jermyn, and it lasted until 1913. Now that building still stands there, but it was turned into a house and an apartment building. And the German Historical Society purchased it last year, and we're restoring it. We're going to turn it into a research center, library, museum, genealogical research center, meeting room, whatever we can do. We got a $50,000 grant to do that. And since then, we've started posting the work that we're doing. We're getting a lot of people that are sending us money to help along with that project. So hopefully by next year, we'll have that open. The Catholic Church in Jermyn came from Archibald, 1875. It was moved from Archibald to Jermyn and placed on Main Street. It actually would be in the spot where Gebhardt's house was. He was the superintendent of the Rushdale power plant, powder mills. And the house is still there. It's a beautiful brick house on Main Street. I think Mary Golden lives there now, the Golden family. And that church was there in 1875. And then they decided to build a brand new church. And the Catholic church that's in Jermyn now was built. And then they used that old Catholic church for a hall, for like a meeting hall for social events. And then that caught on fire and burnt down. So that's no longer there. The Russian Orthodox Church was on Lackawanna Avenue in Jermyn, and 1911, I think it was, that caught on fire and that burnt down. So we had a lot of church fires. And the current Russian Orthodox Church was built, I think, in 1919. That was the last one. The Primitive Methodist Church was 1895. I believe the Baptist Church was the same time. And the Methodist Church was so filled in the 1870s that they had to tear it down and rebuild a larger church, which was rebuilt in 1892. So that church is still standing. That's the one on Main Street. It's the yellow and white church. That was built in 1892. Beautiful inside. All the churches in Jermyn are really beautiful inside. The St. James Episcopal Church is the oldest still standing church in Jermyn, which was built in 1875, I think, dedicated in 76. And that still stands in the same exact place where it was. I believe I have a picture of that here somewhere in my file. It's in here somewhere. When I find it, I'll pull it up and give it to you. How's that? But that's the history of the churches in Jermyn. The schools in Jermyn, there was a school brought from the country after they used just buildings like the Dulce Domum. There was a school brought in from the country that was brought in the 1870s and placed on the corner of Bacon Street and Madison Avenue. And in 1871, the borough decided it was going to build a school. So they put out bids for the school, and that school was built and sat there. It was a graded school is what it was called. And that sat there till 1884 when that burnt down. And then they rebuilt another one. In 1894, they built the high school in the same location, just on a bigger part of the property. So we had the graded school and the high school in the same place. Then that high school burnt down later on, and then somebody put firecrackers in the grade school when I was a kid, and then they tore that building down and they built the Jermyn High School in 1936. First class went in there in 1937, and that lasted as a school until the 1970s. And then it turned into a grade school for a year or two, and then the borough took it over, and it is the current borough building. So on 440 Jefferson Avenue is the borough building, which was the high school at the time. Going back to the early parts of Jermyn, there was on the main street, we had silk mills, we had taverns, we had meat markets, we had barber shops, we had millinery stores, we had general stores. There was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stores in Jermyn over the course of the years. And I'm doing a book right now, putting a book together. We're going to do a Main Street walk down tour in this fall of every business that was on the Main Street in Jermyn as far back as we can record. So it's going to be an interesting interpretation of what Jermyn looked like. And we're going to have pictures of some of the businesses, which would be pictures like, this is Graves Drugstore, which actually was 2 stories and then raised up to be a 3rd story. It is still there. It's Sterling Pharmacy on the Main Street in Jermyn, still in the same place. This was Allen's store, which was a clothing store. Before it was Allen's, it was Baker Brothers store, which was one of the biggest general merchandise stores in Jermyn, and it became Allen's clothing store, which later on moved to Carbondale. Now this one here, this store here, this is Dr. Davis's, S.D. Davis's drugstore. The top floor of this building had an opera house. Dr. Davis, his name was Sumner Davis, and he came to Jermyn in 1869, and he decided he wanted to put a drugstore. He borrowed $50 to be able to move to Jermyn. And he moved to Jermyn, and when he got to Jermyn, he wanted to build a drugstore, so he borrowed some money to build a drugstore, and he put the opera house above it and rented out, made a hall. There was a hall there which he rented out, and he was very instrumental. He was the first master of the lodge of Aurora Lodge number 523, free and accepted Masons, and which I am now the master of the lodge for the 3rd time. But he was the first master of the lodge, S.D. Davis, and I have a picture of him here somewhere. There he is. Look at this picture. Isn't that wonderful? Look at those mutton chops, huh? That's Sumner Davis. Another picture of this gentleman over here on this corner is Reverend Jenkins. Reverend Jenkins was the first minister of the Welsh Congregational Church in 1884. And let's see, this other gentleman up in this corner here is A.L. Green. A.L. Green was the mine foreman for the mines, superintendent of the mines, and he was attacked by the Molly Maguires in 1874. And a couple of the miners and a couple of the men that were in town chased them, and they shot one of the assailants. His name was O'Malia, who died, and they captured one of the other ones' name was Sharkey. So that was an early Molly Maguire attempt in Jermyn, which every time I think of Molly Maguires, I think of James Bond, Mr. Sean Connery himself, who played I think of that all the time. But Jermyn was known for its mines, so we'll don our mining hat with our carbide lamp here, so that you could see that mining was a big part of Jermyn. And this is a bromo seltzer bottle, which every miner had to take because they had so much mine dust in their lungs all the time. You can find these anywhere there was a mine. Bromo seltzer bottles, they're all over. They're cobalt blue, and as an avid collector, I have bottles all over the place. We had 2 bottling companies in Jermyn while I'm thinking about that. One was Bottlers, and the other one was Muldoon's. Bottlers is still in existence today, one building away from where it originated in East Jermyn, right alongside the railroad tracks. The McDermott family has been the owner of that business for well over 100 years. A bottle like that would have been a bottle like this, which would have been circa 1800s bottle. This is a Schrade bottle from Scranton. I didn't bring a bottler's bottle because it's in our glass case and I couldn't pull the case out to open it. But you can see the insignia of the Schrade Bottle Company on top of the glass there. And that's the type of bottle which we would find in the 1800s. Milk was delivered from farms out in Scott Township in Greenfield. And the first milk deliveries in Jermyn were by the Snyder family. And we have a picture in one of our books of Ollie Snyder, which is Olive, her name was, but they called her Ollie, with a horse-drawn wagon delivering the milk to Jermyn. And of course, later on, they would have brought them in bottles like this, which is the LM Cure Bottle Company from Jermyn. We also had the Matthijs Dairy in Jermyn, and that was even there when I was a kid, and you used to go down there and get your what they called a pig's dinner, which was like a banana split. It was so big that you couldn't eat it, and that was on the main street. And right where that building was on Main Street was a very famous restaurant in Scranton right now, a bar and restaurant named Andy Gavin's. Well, it originated in Jermyn. Andy Gavin's, he was the owner of the Forest House, which was a hotel, bar, restaurant on Main Street, which was exactly right across from the Episcopal Church, St. James Episcopal on Main Street. It was Andy Gavin's bar and restaurant, later became the Forest House. We're going to not don our cap anymore and go back to just speaking normal. This is one of the Civil War veterans from Jermyn, John Nicholson. And we had 9 Civil War veterans in Jermyn. So I will don my Civil War hat for that. So now that you know Jermyn, and the Jermyn Civil War veterans are buried in one section of the Jermyn Cemetery, which is in the south part of Jermyn, down by where the powder mills was at the time. That's where the cemetery is now. And the lower part of it has a lot of the old Civil War veterans in there. So we won't don that hat anymore. We're done with that little section. Jermyn had 2 glass factories. One was called the Jermyn Glass Factory, but it was spelled not J-E-R like German is, but G-E-R, like the old Germany. So there was confusion, and they made them change the name because when they said Jermyn Glass, they were spelling it wrong. So it became known as the Kohiner Glass Company, and later became the Laurel Glass Company. And the glass from there is beautiful. It is rare. If you can find it, you can find the patterns to it. It's cut glass. The guy that was the manager and ran the Laurel Cut Glass Company was named H.D. Carey. They also happened to own the house that I lived in as a little boy. His son, Harold Carey, still cut glass in the basement when I was a little boy, and I used to go over and watch him cut glass. And this is the catalog of the Laurel Cut Glass Company. And I purchased this online. I thought I was getting something really good. I thought I was getting a great deal of an old cut glass book. And I bought it from Nova Scotia. I figured, oh, it came from a book dealer in Nova Scotia. Yeah, he sent for it in Florida, where the Glass Association of America has catalogs printed up, replica catalogs, which I could have got myself from Florida. So be wary when you buy something from a book dealer. But that glass book has all kinds of patterns of the glass, and it's beautiful glass. And there's all kinds of colored glass, crystal glass, and it's beautiful. And the other glass company in Jermyn came later, came in 1952, and it was the Dearborn Glass Company, which came from Dearborn, Michigan. But their glass was also beautiful. This is a big picture of it. This is a dinner plate with an eagle on it, gold leaf. All of the Dearborn glass has gold leaf, and everybody I talked to said that it was real gold leaf put into the gold. So I was going to go melt down all my dishes and to get all the gold, but that was our 2 glass companies. We had 2 railroad stations. One was the D&H, and one was the O&W. The D&H was in East Jermyn. That was right across from Bottler's Tavern when you go over into East Jermyn. And the O&W was down off of Main Street, just below, just above the river, just below what was then Avery's Hotel, Collins's Hotel. We had the Eureka Coffin Factory, which was in the same place as the D&H Railroad station was, that was there prior to it, and then became Miller Casket Company, which the Miller brothers worked for the Eureka Coffin Factory, and then they moved and started their own. They built it in the place of John Nicholson's lumber yard, and John Nicholson, who was the person in 1866 who built the Windsor Inn. Now, if you're familiar with Jermyn at all, you're familiar with the second best hot wings in America. They come from the Windsor Inn, which was built in 1866. It was a 3-story building, and the top story burnt in 1963, so it's now currently still there. It's 2 stories. It had a porch added to it and columns added to it. And something famous about the Windsor that I didn't know until I started doing a lot of research was John Mitchell, who was his statue was at the courthouse in Scranton. He was a big advocate for unions, for minor unions, spoke from that balcony in Jermyn, which I didn't know. So we have it's in the newspaper, and I got it through newspapers.com. So it's real and it's out there. If it comes from the internet, it's not real, but it came from a paper, it is. The first hotel that was built, though, was built by Louis Pizer, and it was called the 4 Mile Hotel. And they said it was built 1 block from the second hotel, which he built in 1860 or 1870. 1866 was the 4 Mile Hotel and the Windsor Hotel. They said it was 1 block west of the St. George Hotel, which he built in 1870. Sweeney House, the Sweeney Hotel, was built in 1870, which was directly across from the Windsor Inn on Main Street. Since then, there's been nothing there that's in my lifetime but gas stations. But that was a hotel back in the 1870s and early 1880s. We probably had about 50 hotels in the course of the time in Jermyn. And I know we had 5 in East Jermyn at one time. And let me see if I can pull up some of the names of some of the hotels, because I don't want to miss any of the ones that I had. And that's not my phone. Let's see, the Halls Hotels. Better put the glasses on, it makes it easier. I know we had Messett's Hotel, and we had the Forest House Hotel. We have the Central Hotel, Grand Central Hotel. We had the Avery Collins Hotel, and we had Pash's Hotel over in East Jermyn. And let's see, we had the Farmers Hotel, which was the Windsor. That was what it was named in 1866. We had Wasley's Hotel, and we had Edwards's Hotel and the Central Hotel. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 4 more. There's 11, 12 hotels that were in Jermyn at one time. Newspapers. S.D. Davis started the first newspaper, and he did that right in the same building where he had the drugstore. He built the drugstore. He decided he wanted to start a newspaper. So I think it was around 1881. Let's see, 1881, the Rushbrook Enterprise, and he was the owner of that. And that went until the late 1880s, and it was 75 cents a year, printed monthly from the second floor of his drugstore business, which is the same place where the Opera House was. In the late 1880s, 1880 to 1889, was called the Jermyn Advocate, and that was printed up in Carbondale. In 1890, H. Woodward started the press, and then it changed its name to the Jermyn Press. and then it cut out the and just became Jermyn Press. So it had a bunch of different names, and it was sold to two men. One was named Seymour and one was named Boundy, Thomas Boundy. Thomas Boundy is very famous for the fact that he printed the book, which was the first aid manual used in the country. Jermyn is so well known for a birthplace of first aid. And that came about by the accidents that happened in the mines. And it took so long for a doctor to get to the victims in the mines because they had to come by horse and buggy, which they called the Black Mariah, which was also the funeral wagon at the same time. And that was the ambulance and everything. And it took so long for them to get there that the miners decided on their own to try to form a first aid team. Now we have history of the birthplace of first aid somewhere on my table. And I don't know where I stuck it now. But the book was compiled by, oh, here it is. This is a centennial of the birthplace of first aid. This book was, the history of it was compiled by Robert Tomaine, and it's patented, so I couldn't change any of it. But he wrote all about the history as recorded by Dr. Matthew Shields. But we have a book here by Annie Partridge Hogarth. John Hogarth was one of the members of the first aid team, and his recollection and her recollection, this was written in 1980 at the age of 95, was that her father, John Hogarth, who was a member of the first aid team, he's the one that got everybody together. They went to Dr. Shields to have him help them, and he refused. So he went to England to get a copy of the St. John's Ambulance Society's first aid manual, and none were available. They were going to make a second printing, so he was there in England visiting his brother. His brother said he would send him one, so he sent him one. So in 1899, they got together and formed a first aid class, and I guess they treated some of the patients, according to Hogarth family. And Dr. Shields came on the scene while they were treating a patient and seen that they were doing things the right way and decided, well, maybe I should get involved in this. And then he got involved in 1899, and in 1900 they formed the first aid team in America in the mines. And that's where Jermyn got its fame, claim to fame as the birthplace of first aid in America. And Dr. Matthew Shields went on to get involved with the Red Cross and travel all over the country teaching first aid, and all the first aid manuals in America came about because of the first aid manual. I just recently purchased an original copy of the St. John's Ambulance first aid manual, but I could not locate it to bring it down to show it to you. I put it in the museum in our museum in Jermyn, and I didn't have enough time this morning to search for it diligently, but I will have that back where we can see it. One of the other things about the birthplace of first aid is they had a centennial 50 years after, and they had another one 100 years after. And Jermyn was supposed to have a 150th celebration of the founding of Jermyn, because Jermyn became a borough in 1870. So last year was supposed to be our 150th anniversary, our sesquicentennial, which we didn't have because of COVID. So we're hoping to this year at least have a dinner. We wanted to have a parade and a picnic. We can't do that, but because we've researched the history of Jermyn so much more now, we've uncovered a lot of things that weren't there before. So we're rewriting the history and putting a new book together. So hopefully that'll be published by the end of this year. I'm going to go back and look at some of my notes to see if there's anything else I missed. I do know that the coal companies in Jermyn, there were 3 in Jermyn, 1 in Mayfield, so there were 4 coal companies total. The Vesey Coal Company. It was 1861. That was called the West Mountain Coal Company. It was just outside of Jermyn on the Rushbrook Road heading towards Heart Lake. And it was called the West Mountain Coal Company, or Vesey Coal Company. It was later purchased by S.D. Davis, who I guess made a lot of money in the drug business and decided to expand his horizon. So he bought the coal company. And if you're going out of Jermyn on Route 107 heading towards Heart Lake, on the right-hand side, you'll see two old foundations. Those foundations are the office and actually was where they stored the dynamite for the Vesey Coal Company. One of the mines is still up on the mountain on the northern side of Rushbrook Road, and we were in that not too long ago. We went up and took a visit up there, and one of the guys that was there, Dale Kecklack, a good friend of mine, a member of our society, he films that stuff like that. A couple of guys went up and climbed down in the mine and actually walked down in there. You can still see the timbers. It went in for about 1,000 feet. And the other mine was the #1 mine in Jermyn, the #1 Gibson Colliery and the #2 Gibson Colliery. And then Mayfield had the Glenwood Colliery, which was, we have a picture somewhere of that one. And that was pretty big, spanned right across Main Street going into Mayfield. A couple of pictures that I brought with me that I wanted to get up. This picture here is, you can see this building right here that burnt down in 1903. That was the Oddfellows Hall, and this is William Steele's candy store right next door. That was where I had my baseball card shop in the 1980s. And this building over here is the Windsor Inn. That's what it looked like back in the 1800s with the 3 floors on it. And that now only has 2 floors, but that's when the roads were dirt. And the picture was taken from H. Freese's feed mill, which was directly across the street. And how much time do we have? This is a better picture of the Hotel Windsor. And you can see there how nice it was. It was a beautiful building, and the Edmonds and Snyder family owned it at that time. And you can see them right in front of it. That's their family right in front. And you'll see this little addition over here on this side. That's no longer there. In 1904, Jermyn had the biggest fire in the history of Jermyn. We had a lot of fires in Jermyn, I guess, from the way I'm speaking here. But the 1904 fire took from the Hotel Windsor all the way to the Jermyn Bank building. And it consisted, this is the Jermyn Bank building, built in 1902. I'll bring it back a little bit so you could see it. That was a brick building in 1902. And since then, they built a new building, but that was where the fire stopped. The fire started in the Staples livery stable, which was in the back parking lot of where the Windsor is now. There was a building built right over the Rushbrook Creek, which had a restaurant and a confectionery store in it. Assembly Hall was right next to the Windsor, which is in the vacant lot next to the Windsor now. That was a big meeting place. They had dances in there. They had roller skating in there. They had meetings in there. There was 2 stores in the lower floor there. And there was 8 buildings in total that were caught on fire. There's one article in the Scranton newspaper that says the Hotel Windsor burnt and it was $10,000 worth of damage. The only thing that burnt was that little addition that was on the side of the picture that I showed you. But everything from that point south down to the Jermyn Bank burnt, including Dr. Matthew Shields' house. So all those buildings were completely leveled and completely destroyed. And the only thing that saved it was the fact that the brick building was the bank, and it was solid brick, and it didn't catch on fire. So that saved the whole block from burning down at the time. So that was our worst fire in town. They rebuilt the Assembly Hall later on. The Edmonds family, who owned the Windsor at the time, they built the assembly hall back up again. It was a big 3-story brick building where they still had they had a movie house in it, they had roller skating in it, they had offices in it, they had stores in the basement on the ground floor, and that stood up until the 1950s, I believe. They tore it down because I sort of remember it as a little kid in Jermyn, but it doesn't ring a bell because I didn't play a lot in that section of town because that was Main Street, and I was over at the field playing baseball, football, and basketball my whole life. So I didn't get a chance to venture down there as a little boy. We were allowed to ride our bicycles so far, but we never went down by Main Street. So stores, there was the Baker Brothers store, Allen's store, C.D. Winter's store. There was all kinds of grocery stores. There was J.D. Stocker. J.D. Stocker had one of the largest general stores. It was a meat market, and then later on became a general store. J.D. Stocker was the man who gave a $100 donation to start the J.D. Stocker Fire Company in Jermyn. That was in 1900. And the only thing they had was a hose cart, and it was held in a little shed behind the Sweeney House Hotel on Main Street. They never built a fire company building, and it disbanded not too long after that. But the reason for that is there was already 2 fire companies in Jermyn, the Crystal Fire Company, which formed in 1885. That was the first fire company outside of the city of Scranton, Carbondale, and Dunmore. It was the first one in any town in the Mid-Valley. 1885. They got their first hose cart in 1900, I believe. The Artesian Fire Company was formed in 1898. They got their first hose cart in 1902. And then the J.D. Stocker was the far uppermost end of town, which was towards the Carbondale Township, actually towards the Mayfield line, but in that old map it would have showed as Carbondale Township. That was, Jermyn was divided into 3 wards, 1, 2, and 3. The first ward was the southern part, and that was where the Artesian Fire Company was. The second ward was where the Crystal Fire Company was, and the third ward was where the J.D. Stocker Hose Company was. But that disbanded. We had jewelry stores on Main Street, Forstner's Jewelry Store. We had Griffith's Barber Shop. We had Danny Couture as a barber. We had Coggins as a barber. We had Laputa's as a barber. There was all kinds of millinery stores. There was a 5 and 10 cent store, Miller's store. We still have the wooden 5 and dime insignias that were on the front of that building in our historical society. That came in the 1940s, a little bit later on. Let's see. This is the Laurel cut glass. That's the building that burnt in 1903. That's the Laurel Cut Glass Company. It was a big, big building. It was there in the 1880s, 1890s, and it worked all the way up until it burnt in 1903. And some of the glass was beautiful. And the last picture I have, this was Battenberg store, which is still in existence today in Jermyn. It is the only one. This one didn't burn down. This family they started as an undertaking business, and he was a casket maker, and then he went into selling furniture, and it was Gustav. They came from Germany, Gustav Battenberg, and it's still on Main Street. Charlie Battenberg Sr. and Jr. still run it. AFA Battenberg was there before. Floyd Battenberg was there. They had horses, and they were always in parades. We found a picture of them in the Carbondale Centennial Parade with their float. And Battenberg's had been there well over 100 years. We have the Windsor there over 100 years. We have Bottler's there over 100 years. And we have the Battenberg's Furniture Store there over 100 years. The only house that's still in Jermyn that's under the same family is the Mullally House on Madison Avenue. It's in the same family for well over 100 years. I don't know how much more time you want me to keep going. Do you guys want to ask any questions? There's a lot more I could go over, but I could be here all day. Does anybody have any questions?
If anybody has any questions, I was muting people as we were going, so please remember to unmute yourselves. But if you have any questions, please chime in. We have a few minutes for questions now.
I have a question.
Okay, Lenny?
When did Jermyn become Jermyn, the name Jermyn?
Well, it became the name Jermyn in 1874. Here's John Jermyn. That's a picture of John Jermyn. Jermyn was Gibsonburg when it was incorporated in 1870. And then the D&H railroad station decided they were going to put John Jermyn's name on the side of their railroad station and call it the station Jermyn. So the town decided to rename the town Jermyn. Originally, the coal mines were run by, like I said in the beginning, J.P. Offerman. And then a lawyer from Philadelphia named Gibson purchased all the property and started to run the mines, but they didn't work out. So they sat idle from 1864 to 1865. John Jermyn came into Jermyn from Scranton. He was a miner. He worked in the mines in Scranton, and then he bought a few mines and ran them. And when he came to Jermyn, he took over the Gibson mine. And he did that in 1865. And in 1874, they changed the name to Jermyn. And the Jermyn family is well known. One of the mayors of Scranton was E.B. Jermyn. Jermyn, Texas is named after one of the Jermyn family. And John Jermyn, a great-great-grandson of John Jermyn, still comes and visits us up in Jermyn and still is a member of our Facebook family. Any other questions?
Delita,
I have a
you
question.
something?
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, my question, I don't know if my question is, in the glass factories you were talking about, is there any factory that's in existence now, and do they give tours?
There are no glass factories in Jermyn now, but the only glass factory I know of is the one up in Holly. What is it? The Dorflinger glass
That's
company.
okay,
That's
that's
up
the
in Holly.
one I was thinking.
You go through Honesdale and go up by to where the drive-in movie theater is,
Mhm.
and you make a left right there and go up over the hill, and it's up in there.
But that did not originate in German. That's
No.
okay. That's
No.
probably the one I was thinking of. The
Yeah,
other question I have is in the structure of the buildings. I noticed I believe one that you were showing, and it's not the first time I've seen that type of structure coming in from New Jersey, where I'm originally from. I remember seeing a gas station, and the point I'm making is it may be 2 stories or 3 stories, the building, but the first floor, it's recessed, the entrance to the building, but it's not just a normal roof, porch type roof. It's encased in a building as if you could close it off and make a room. Is there any reason for that, or it's just how they did it?
I am not an architect at all. I don't know why they did that, but I do know that a lot of the buildings in Jermyn had porches enclosed later on. They had openings, like you say, in where you would walk underneath a cantilevered type area and go into the building. We've had quite a few of them on Main Street that were that way. But I couldn't answer why it was done.
It certainly protects you from the weather. I mean,
Yeah.
other than having the roof on the left and right side, you have walls,
Yeah.
but I thought that was interesting. And as a child, I always remember that and never forgot the gas station.
Yeah,
The
most of
roof
the
was up.
gas stations were built like that because you could drive under them to get your gas. And then I see on Main Street, we had a pile of gas stations. We had a Ford dealership on Main Street too, right across from the Methodist Church at one time, which I didn't know about until I found a picture of an old building, and it had the script written Ford emblem on the side of the building. We had quite a few gas stations. I mean, Jermyn Mill and Grain, Max Friedman put the Jermyn Mill and Grain in there, and it was a mill and grain store until they decided they needed to supply vehicles. There's a story about a little boy that was on Main Street looking at Kris Kringle in the window of C.D. Winner's General Store, standing on Main Street, when he got run over or got hit by a horse, who got startled because a motor car was coming down Main Street, and the boy got knocked over by the horse. So
Did he survive though?
yes, he did. Yes,
Yeah,
he
because that could be quite dangerous.
did.
I have just a comment. First of all, I have to say you were extremely interesting. I enjoyed the whole program.
Thank you.
Really, you had enough of everything to just make me feel like I love it living in today's times, but I would love to just experience what you were saying in those days. But my comment, other than enjoying your program, is as we have the program Chicago Fire, we should have Jermyn Fire, the way you were talking about, a program in here, Northeast Pennsylvania.
Jermyn certainly seems to have an incendiary history there.
Yes.
Mimi?
I just want to say, you didn't mention the Egan hardware store on Main Street. The last time I saw the building, it was still there.
It's still there.
After it was Egan's, it is.
Yes.
That was my grandfather's. They lived in that house and that was his store.
Okay, that was Connor's store.
Then it became a grocery store,
It
Connor's
became a
grocery
grocery
store.
store. It was a plumbing and hardware store, and Egan got it from their name was Erk, E-R-K. Erk Brothers built it originally after the fire in 1904. They built that building as a hardware store, and then Egan took it over as a plumbing, and it was Egan and O'Donnell actually who owned that store. And then it became a grocery store, and now it's Donna Brenzel's insurance store. It's still there.
Bruce, you mentioned somebody named Green who was a mine superintendent.
A.L. Green, yeah.
But when I was a kid, there was a Jermyn-Green coal company. Any connection, do you think?
I've never heard of it. Not in German.
Yeah.
Was it spelled the German the same way? J-E-R?
Yes, it was.
Oh,
But I don't remember where they were located. Somewhere in the valley.
I'll have to look for that now because it wasn't in German, but I will look for it and find out.
Okay, Jermyn
The
Green.
Greens were very well-known family in German. Paul Green was on the school board for years and years and years. There were a lot of the Greens that a lot of the family stayed in German. I don't know if there's anything else that you're interested in, but one of the main topics that we spoke on was the fires. So let me go through real quick because I found my list of fires, and if Joe Clapatch, if I get his name right, Mr. Joe Clapatch, who was a fire aficionado and wrote a book on it. In 1884, the graded school was destroyed by fire. In 1897, the parish hall on Main Street was destroyed by fire. In 1897, Trans-Sioux resident on the corner of Bacon Street was destroyed by fire. In 1898, the engine house of the Delaware and Hudson Colliery was destroyed by fire. The George Berry house was in 1899 was on fire. The Rich building, which was the largest store in Jermyn, was on fire in 1899. It was a dry goods and hardware store. 1899, Mr. and Mrs. James Evans's house was destroyed by fire. The 4-cent store on Main Street in Jermyn. I never heard of a store called the 4-cent store. But it was owned by William Merritt in the 700 block, which would be the northern part of Jermyn Main Street. That was destroyed by fire. Actually, it had caught on fire 2 days before and then re-caught on fire 2 days later. So we had a lot of people, I think, running around with matches back in then. We had some people that were killed in fires, and I don't want to go through that, but the Laurel Clutt glass factory was destroyed by fire. The grist mill actually got the H.L. Freese grist mill was struck by lightning and split in half. The building was split in half by a lightning strike. There was, let's see, livery stables. The Mumford livery stable burnt twice. That was a big fire in 1925, which is right below Main Street. The West Mountain Coal Breaker caught on fire in 1929. That was a big fire. 1928, the Browns Product Company, which is a furniture company, that caught on fire. There was the St. James Episcopal Church had a small fire, which was contained to the front part of the church. There was a fireworks accident on the James Allen home, which was destroyed by fire. And the Rushbrook Hotel was destroyed by fire. The Staples livery stable was destroyed by fire. The Oddfellows Hall destroyed by fire. Mr. and Mrs. Elmer Roll's house was destroyed by fire. And that's just early on up to 1920s. That's just a few of the fires that were there that we can find in newspaper articles.
Well, I would say that's a whole year's program on German fires. We need to have a director,
We could do
a
that.
writer.
The powder mill exploded either, so.
Yeah, and that's not counting the explosions. And they said that the little steel balls from the powder mill explosion were going 7 and 8 miles away from where it exploded.
Oh,
Wow.
We have a few
Unbelievable.
pictures. We have a few pictures of the explosion of the one building down right next to the river. There was a dam built there, which I think was the dam that Captain Daniel Bacon built for his sawmills. And right where that dam is where the powder mill exploded. The glazier part of the building exploded, and 2 men were killed in it. And that I have pictures of that, of the men standing there with their ties and suits on, with shovels, trying to dig out people and different things out of the thing to see if anybody else was there. So it was pretty amazing the amount of things that happened there. There was a lot of explosions in the mines too. There was one part where 2 men were in the mines and they were setting a charge of dynamite, and it didn't go off. And so they walked towards it, and when they walked towards it to see if they could relight it, it exploded, and the first man was killed, the second man was injured, and they had to take him out. But there were a lot of mine accidents, so we have a list of mine accidents. Mr. Walter Avery, he was our president of the Historical Society, just passed away this past Christmas, and he compiled all of the books that we have. We must have 25 or 30 books of newspaper articles, pictures, magazine articles, things on just about everything. And before I go, I want to show you this book. This book is from World War II. This lady was a nurse in Pearl Harbor, and when she came back, she wrote this book, and her name was Anna Yurda Busby. Her name was Anna Yurda, and she remarried and became Anna Yurda Busby. She was a nurse at World War II at Pearl Harbor. Jermyn had, the Methodist Church alone had 101 men in World War II, just from the Methodist Church in Jermyn. There was 569 men and women involved that went to World War II. And we had 12 men killed in World War I. I believe we had 169 people in Jermyn that went to World War I. They built planted 12 trees in memory of those 12 people that were killed in World War I, and most of those trees are still standing. We just built a World War I park where those trees were. And there's a little monument there and a little pavilion. But Jermyn's a nice, quiet little town, still is. I enjoyed being the mayor, and I enjoyed living there. I came there as 6 months old. My family lived there long before my father actually was working in New York State where I was born. So I actually lived in New York. So I can be like other politicians and say I'm from New York, even though I was only there for 6 minutes.
Very good. Well, Bruce, we may have to bring you back again to do a part 2. I didn't
That'd be
realize
great.
there was quite so much history of Jermyn. But we are just about out. We are out of time for today. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your photos and your collections. I appreciate your costume changes as you were doing your program.
I enjoyed it. Now I'm going to have a ginger beer.
You're all set there. So thank you for joining us and for sharing your stories. And to everyone else, thank you for tuning in today. Our next program will be on Friday, April 23rd. We'll be joined with Ted Baird, who's a North Pocono resident. Ted will be talking about Covington Township. Covington recently celebrated their 200th anniversary. So I have a chance to learn a little bit about Covington Township, kind of a northern area of the township of Lackawanna County that we don't really talk about too much. So please stay tuned for that one. We're excited to learn a little bit more about Covington Township. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.